They used my money to pay for a honeymoon I wasn't even invited to discuss. At the wedding, I was listed as logistics support in the program right under the DJ and parking coordinator. My father stole $10,000 from my private investment account during the exact moment I was giving a toast to the bride and groom. No one clapped for me. No one thanked me. Not even a nod. And when I confronted my family, they said I was overreacting. My name is Julia Whitmore. I'm 36 years old living in Chicago, and I work in financial risk management. If that sounds like a person who notices things, you'd be right. I've always noticed everything, like the way my father always asked me to be quiet whenever I tried to explain a budget, or the way my mother praised my younger brothers for accomplishments that were frankly mediocre at best. My youngest brother James once got a participation trophy in 8th grade soccer, and the entire family took him out to dinner. When I got a full scholarship to Northwestern, they mailed me a card, no signature, just a printed quote. I used to think it was just a family dynamic. Some people grow up with love languages. Mine spoke through invoices and transaction logs. So let me take you back to the day I found out about the money. It was the Monday after my brother Andrew's wedding. I'd just gotten back from Ohio, still tired from planning, coordinating, hosting, and apparently funding most of the event. I wasn't bitter, at least not yet. I'd done it out of love, or what I thought was love. I made tea, sat by my window, opened my bank dashboard. I have several accounts. I like to keep things compartmentalized. One account in particular is only used for my long-term investments, quietly compounding untouched, tracked down to the decimal. Except now, one of the numbers was wrong. $10,000 was missing. I blinked, refreshed the page, nothing changed. I clicked into the transaction history. It had been transferred in full through an online transaction portal I rarely used at 6:42 p.m. on Saturday. At 6:42 p.m. on Saturday, I was on a stage, holding a microphone, toasting my brother Andrew and his new wife with a carefully prepared speech about partnership, legacy, and family. The irony didn't hit me until later. At first, I thought it was a bank error. Then I checked the IP address, familiar, Midwest-based. The same general location as the hotel we stayed at. Still, I wasn't ready to accuse anyone. I wanted data, not doubt. That's when I called a friend, Josh, from cybersecurity. He owed me a favor. 30 minutes later, he sent over a report. Device ID, browser signature metadata. It came from my father's iPad, an old device logged into my backup email address years ago when I helped him set up his retirement account. One I forgot to deauthorize. He had access. He used it. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because there's a pattern to betrayal. You don't respond when you're angry. You respond when they're most comfortable. Let me rewind. I grew up in a 3-bedroom home in Columbus, Ohio. My parents, Dennis and Marianne Whitmore, believed in traditional values, which basically meant the boys played and I worked. My brothers were golden-haired, athletic, and easygoing. I was the planner, the fixer, the daughter who knew how to file taxes by 16. My father used to joke, if Julia ever runs for office, we'll finally have someone to do the paperwork. Everyone laughed, including me. I didn't realize I was the joke. By 23, I'd bought my first condo. By 27, I was managing high-level portfolios. At 31, I refinanced my parents' mortgage interest-free. They said thank you, then asked if I could cover James's tuition for just one semester. It was never one semester. So when Andrew announced his engagement to Melissa and asked if I'd help out, I didn't flinch. I handled the guest list, the florist, the vendors. I even paid the deposit for the honeymoon suite. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it was love. What I didn't know was that my father had told Melissa's family that he was funding everything. Every single thing. During the rehearsal dinner, her mother pulled me aside and said, "You must be so proud of your father, Julia. He's doing so much for Andrew." I smiled. Said nothing. That's what I always did. Smile. Say nothing. Because what do you say when your family decides your value is in silence? The wedding day itself was beautiful, if exhausting. I arrived at 6 a.m. and left at midnight. I was never seated at the main table. During the reception, someone asked if I was part of the catering team. I laughed. At 6:40 p.m., I stood with a glass of sparkling wine, took a breath, and began my toast. I said things like, "May your marriage be filled with generosity and respect. May you never take each other for granted. May your family always recognize the people who show up when it matters. Applause followed, but it wasn't loud. It was polite. Later, when Andrew and Melissa did their speech, they thanked their parents, their friends, the wedding planner, even the band. Not a single word about me. My father gave a closing statement, said it takes a village, and in our case, a patriarch with a good credit score. People laughed. That was Saturday. By Monday, I knew what he'd done. And the strange part, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even curse. I opened a folder on my desktop labeled Family Ledger. It wasn't new, it had over 50 entries. Each loan, each payment, each act of quiet sacrifice. I scrolled to the bottom, added one more line, $10,000 withdrawal. Unauthorized, 6:42 p.m. Wedding night. Initiated by Dennis Whitmore. Then I printed it, stapled it to a letter I began drafting at 2 a.m. Not a letter of rage, not even a letter of disappointment. Just a formal request for repayment, with an itemized list. And a deadline. 7 days, wire transfer, no exceptions. And I ended it with one sentence: you raised me to be responsible. Consider this me following through. It wasn't a hacker. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a bank error or a technical glitch or a rogue staff member working late on a Saturday night. It was someone who knew me, someone who had once kissed my forehead goodnight and called me his logical little star. The device ID, IP address, geolocation data, and timestamp all pointed to one person, my father, Dennis Whitmore. He'd used an old iPad I helped him set up 5 years ago, the same one I linked temporarily to my backup email during a tax filing emergency. And I forgot to remove access. I should have remembered, I should have known, but I didn't. Because somewhere in my overly structured, overly efficient mind, I still wanted to believe there were corners of this family that respected boundaries, financial or otherwise. I reread the metadata Josh sent me, again and again. Browser history, time of transaction, 2-step verification failure bypassed, because it was a recognized device. Recognized. That word lingered. I recognized the pattern now, not just in numbers and logs and timestamps, but in behavior, in silence, in smiles that weren't smiles, in every instance where I convinced myself they didn't mean it that way. The money wasn't the first time, just the boldest. That night, I opened a fresh document on my laptop, titled it Primary Incident Log. No emotion, just facts. $10,000 withdrawn from investment account C transaction, processed at 6:42 p.m. Saturday device ID, matched Dennis Whitmore's iPad IP address. Same hotel network used during wedding weekend email access, via secondary Gmail. Link forgotten permission from 2020. No notification triggered due to device trust status. I stared at that last line for longer than necessary. No notification triggered. That's what family betrayal feels like, doesn't it, Silent? Trusted. Slipping past your defenses because you made the mistake of letting someone in. I closed the laptop, pushed it aside, made myself another cup of tea. Chamomile this time. Not because I believed it would calm me, but because I wanted to remember this moment with clarity. No adrenaline, no shaking, no fog of rage to distort the image. Just me, a mug, and the slow realization that the man who taught me to budget had stolen from me. I thought about calling him, confronting him directly, but no, he didn't deserve a warning shot. Instead, I made 3 calls. First to my bank requesting a formal investigation on record and a written report of internal system data for legal purposes. Second to my lawyer friend Elena, whose sharp mind and quiet rage made her the best ally for this sort of thing. And third to myself, a silent contract, that I would not let this get buried in excuses, that I would not default back to silence and endurance and the sickly sweetness of forgiveness for the sake of keeping the peace. There is no peace built on unpaid debts. I checked the folder on my desktop labeled Family Finances. Dozens of files, spreadsheets, receipts, emails, a digital museum of every sacrifice I'd made. Somewhere inside, I'd always thought I was building something. Loyalty, perhaps. Leverage. Maybe even love. But now I realized I'd only been building proof. This wasn't just about the money. This was about the moment I stopped pretending theft looked different when done by someone who once held your hand. I was 23 when I handed over my first paycheck. It wasn't even that big. A junior analyst salary, fresh out of grad school, working 80-hour weeks in a windowless office. But when I held that piece of paper printed in corporate blue ink, I felt like I was finally worth something. I remember standing in my parents' kitchen, still in my cheap gray blazer and tight heels. My fingers smelled like subway rails and printer toner. I was exhausted but proud. My father sat at the table flipping through a sports magazine. My mother was stirring pasta on the stove, humming off-key. I said, "Dad, I got my first paycheck today." He didn't look up. Yeah, I smiled. "I want to help with the utilities this month. I know things have been tight." That got his attention. He folded the magazine and turned to face me. "You sure you can spare it? I wouldn't offer if I couldn't," I said. I pulled out the check, folded neatly, still warm from the envelope. I handed it to him like it was a trophy. He held it up to the light, nodding slightly. "Not bad," he muttered. "You'll be making real money in no time." He tucked the check into his shirt pocket. No thank you, no hug, not even a smile. I turned to my mother, hoping for something. She just said, "Don't forget to rinse the dishes after dinner." I told myself it was fine. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they didn't know how to say thank you. Maybe their generation wasn't built for softness. I washed the dishes. Alone. Same as always. Later that night, I called my friend Danielle and told her the whole story. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "That's really generous of you, Jules. But you don't have to prove your worth like that." I laughed. "I'm not proving anything. I'm just helping." But even as I said it, something in my stomach twisted. Helping. That word again. The family always called it that. Whenever I skipped a vacation to pay off James's credit card debt, it was helping. Whenever I canceled a date night to edit Andrew's college essays, it was helping. Whenever I wired money to my parents just until next Friday, and Friday came and went. And nothing was said again, it was helping. Helping became my love language. Not because I chose it, but because it was the only one they responded to. I used to keep the receipt from that first utility bill payment in a box labeled milestones. It was tucked in there with my college diploma, my first apartment lease, and a photo of me standing alone at my grad school ceremony. No one came that day. My brothers had exams. My parents said the flights were too expensive, so I took a selfie. It's still on my hard drive. A photo of me in a blue cap and gown standing under a banner that said, "Congratulations, graduates." I'm smiling, but my eyes look tired. The kind of tired you can't fix with sleep. The kind of tired that comes from always showing up and never being seen. So yes, the $10,000 stung deeply. But it wasn't about that single act. It was about every dollar before it. Every sacrifice I made to buy their approval. Every memory where I convinced myself that giving more would earn more. It never did. But back then, I didn't know that. Back then, I thought handing over that first check made me a daughter worth keeping. Elena was the one who convinced me to go back to therapy. "You're not crazy," she said. "But this is going to eat you alive if you keep processing it through spreadsheets." She wasn't wrong. So I booked a follow-up with Dr. Leslie Marks. She was quiet, mid-50s, wore linen scarves, and always smelled like peppermint tea. The kind of woman who could say, "Tell me more," without sounding like a meme. I sat across from her, legs crossed too tightly, arms folded like a blueprint. She asked, "What's brought you back?" I thought about lying. Saying something vague. Work stress, fatigue, general burnout. But instead I said, "My father stole $10,000 from me during my brother's wedding." She didn't blink, just nodded. "How did you find out?" I traced the IP, matched the device ID. "It came from his tablet." "Have you confronted him?" "Not yet." Why not? Because he doesn't get to feel like this was a misunderstanding. He knew what he was doing. He planned it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked something I didn't expect. Was this the first time I opened my mouth? Closed it. Because technically, yes, this was the first theft. But the first time they took something from me that started long before online banking. I stared at a crack in the wall behind her couch. Thin, vertical, probably cosmetic. But still, it was there. And suddenly, I couldn't unsee it. "I gave them my first paycheck," I said quietly. "They didn't thank me." Dr. Marks said nothing. Just let the silence stretch. I continued. "I paid off their credit card debt, co-signed loans, covered medical bills, bought groceries for weekends I didn't even attend. Every time I told myself it was fine, that it was love, and now I think it was survival. Her pen scratched against the notebook. I took a breath. I used to believe that if I was useful, I'd be safe. That if I kept solving everyone's problems, they'd never push me out. But they didn't push you out, she said gently. They pulled you in. Because they knew you'd never say no. That landed hard. They never had to steal before I whispered. Because I gave everything away. Until you stopped. I nodded. That's when people show their true selves, she added. When the supply line is threatened. I looked out the window behind her. A squirrel darted across a branch. A pair of leaves fluttered down and caught on the edge of a windowsill. What if it's my fault, I asked. What part for making it so easy? She leaned forward. It's not your job to teach people how to respect you, but it is your job to protect yourself when they don't. I didn't cry. I never do in public. But something shifted. A kind of internal click. Like when you finally solve the puzzle, but the picture it forms is one you don't want to see. We sat in silence for a few seconds before I asked, do you think people can change? I think some people learn when they're held accountable. Others just get better at hiding. And my father. She didn't answer. Instead, she said, let's talk about what you plan to do next. That question stayed with me long after I left her office. What do you do after waking up to 36 years of quiet betrayal? You don't yell, you don't scream. You document. You build your case. And then when they least expect it, you deliver your answer in full, like an invoice with interest. After that session with Dr. Marks, I went home and reopened every document I had ever saved with the label family, receipts, emails, transfer records. My financial life had always been organized. Now it became forensic. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was building a record. When people lie long enough, they forget the paper trail. I didn't. I contacted Melinda, an old colleague from my early days at Bryant Capital. She'd transitioned into a specialized role at a private investigation firm that handled digital fraud. I asked if she could help confirm some details. I didn't need the results to know the truth, but I wanted it official, cold, undeniable. She was discreet, efficient. 2 days later, she sent me a package. Inside was a sealed envelope, a USB drive, and a note that simply read, Julia. He did it, thoroughly, no ambiguity. The USB had every timestamp, every device ID, the browser fingerprint, and the access logs matching the withdrawal to my father's tablet. The kicker, he'd logged in under my backup Gmail at exactly 6:41 p.m., initiated the transfer at 6:42 p.m., logged out at 6:43 p.m. It was during my speech, literally. While I stood under a string of fairy lights and raised a glass to new beginnings, he stole $10,000 from me, and not just any $10,000. This account was sacred. It was my legacy fund, my long-term investment pool and index portfolio I built during my first promotion. I hadn't touched it in 5 years. He chose that account, not the checking account, not a travel card, not some vague shared expense. He reached into the part of me I had never offered him and took it. It was intentional. I called Josh again, the cybersecurity friend who first flagged the device ID. I told him I'd gotten confirmation and asked him for one more favor. I need to know where he was physically when he made the transaction. Josh whistled. You're going full bloodhound, huh? I just want to know if he was in the room. He ran geolocation cross-referencing based on Wi-Fi logs. The result? My father had been seated in the lounge area of the wedding venue, feet away from the reception hall, sipping whiskey with the groom's uncle while draining my account. I could almost picture it. Leather armchair, dim yellow light, a casual lean forward, a fingerprint scan, a few silent taps, and poof, $10,000, gone in less than 90 seconds. I stared at the geolocation report for a long time, not in disbelief, but in grief. Because I had just given a speech about trust and family and showing up when it counts, and the man who raised me had sat there calculating. Not in rage, not in desperation, just convenience. That was the hardest part. If he had begged me, I probably would have helped. If he had explained a medical emergency or a debt or some misguided promise to Andrew and Melissa, I could have rationalized it. But this wasn't need, it was entitlement. He didn't ask because he never believed he had to. because in his mind my money was just an extension of my obedience. That night I pulled up the guest list from the wedding and highlighted every vendor I'd paid in full. I tallied every cost. Then I added one more column amount unacknowledged. It totaled $22, $786.75. No receipts from him. No reimbursements. Not even verbal acknowledgement. I printed that number and taped it to the refrigerator. A personal reminder that even love should have ledgers. When you give and give without accountability, you're not generous. You're bleeding. So I stopped. I shut down all passive access points, unlinked old emails, revoked device permissions, enabled new security measures. I created a new account labeled Boundary Capital Fund. Password protected. Double authenticated. No one else would ever touch it. Then I sent a brief message to Elena, my lawyer friend. Let's draft the letter. Her reply came instantly. Thought you'd never ask. 2 nights after locking down every account I owned, I found myself seated across from Melissa's parents at a small Italian restaurant in Upper Arlington. They had invited me for a quiet thank you dinner, just the 3 of us. Andrew and Melissa were still on their honeymoon in Santorini, booked, I assumed, with the stolen funds. I almost declined, but something inside me wanted to witness the story from the other side, to hear the version they'd been told, to see how deep the illusion had gone. Mrs. Lancaster, Melissa's mother, was warm, sharply dressed, and excessively polite, the kind of woman who used cloth napkins even at home and made you feel like your silence meant agreement. Mr. Lancaster was more casual. Tanned skin, steel gray hair, sport coat over a crisp polo, golf dad energy, kind but distant. Over the first course, they complimented the wedding. The flowers, the food, the atmosphere. We were so touched by how much your family contributed, Mrs. Lancaster said. Your father really stepped up. My hand tightened around the stem of my wine glass. I smiled carefully. Oh, I replied. Yes, she continued, unaware. He said he wanted Andrew to have the kind of wedding he never could. That it was time he gave back to his children. She beamed. He's very proud of you, by the way. He said you're the brains behind the whole event. Did he, of course? He called you the operations unit. I swallowed hard. Operations unit, not sister, not daughter, not even planner. Just a cog, a function. Mr. Lancaster chimed in. Melissa told us you covered the booking for the venue, the catering deposits. That was incredibly generous. It was, I said. They both looked momentarily uncomfortable. Well, Mrs. Lancaster said softly, we've been thinking. We didn't know the costs were so heavily shouldered on your side. If you'd be open to it, we'd like to reimburse a portion. She reached for her purse. I raised a hand. No need, I said. Truly, Julia, she began. It's only fair, I said. No. My voice wasn't sharp, but it was final. The truth is, I didn't want their money. Not because of pride, but because it wasn't their debt. They hadn't lied. They hadn't taken. Their crime was simply believing the script my father handed them, that he was the provider, the patriarch, the noble man giving his son a good start. I didn't fault them for playing their part. I faulted myself for writing the check that made it all possible. After dessert, Mrs. Lancaster touched my arm and said, You're an extraordinary sister. I forced a smile. I try. She smiled back. And your father? Well, I hope he realizes how lucky he is. I nodded, but inside all I could think was, no, he doesn't. He never did. That night I drove back to my hotel with the windows down, cool air against my face. Silence in the car. I didn't cry, I didn't fume. I just kept hearing that phrase echo in my mind. Operations unit. As if that's all I'd ever been to them. A utility, a walking checkbook. A silence they could rely on. But that version of me was gone. They just didn't know it yet. The morning after dinner with Melissa's parents, I woke up early. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because I'd finally decided what needed to happen next. This wasn't about punishment. It wasn't revenge. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone's name or reputation. I didn't want to embarrass my father or shame my family. I just wanted the record corrected, quietly, properly, with the same clinical precision I'd learned to survive with. I wanted what was mine, returned. No sentiment, no apology required, just math. I brewed a black coffee, opened my laptop, and created a new folder titled Restitution. Inside it, I placed a spreadsheet with every cost I'd covered for the wedding, from vendor deposits to transportation reimbursements to the emergency order of extra wine bottles when the head count unexpectedly ballooned. Line by line, item by item. $21. It was $74.75. And then I added the $10,000 withdrawal from my investment account. I debated whether to separate it, but ultimately I didn't. It didn't matter how it was taken, openly or covertly. It came from me. The final total stood $31.74.75. I took a breath. Then I called Elena. She picked up on the first ring. "Ready, more than ready," I said. She met me at her office 2 hours later, small, tidy, tucked into the corner of a glass high-rise that looked out over downtown. Her desk was covered in legal pads, fountain pens, and a framed photo of her bulldog Gary. "I drafted something last night," she said, "just in case you changed your mind." She slid the paper across the table. I read the first paragraph. "This letter serves as a formal notice of financial misappropriation involving personal funds belonging to Julia Whitmore, withdrawn on date, via unauthorized access to account C." It was perfect, dry, respectful, legally sound. There were no emotional appeals, no accusations, no rage disguised as reason. Just the truth laid bare in clean typeface and bulletproof language. We adjusted a few lines, added the spreadsheet as an appendix, then signed and printed it on crisp ivory stock, folded carefully, sealed inside a plain white envelope, no return address. I stared at it for a while. Elena watched me. "You good?" I nodded. "I'm just thinking how strange it is that I still feel like I'm betraying them." "You're not," she said simply. "You're just finally telling the truth." I didn't mail the letter. I wanted to hand-deliver it. Because this wasn't a transaction, it was a declaration. That night I rehearsed what I'd say, not because I expected a confrontation, but because I wanted to stay steady, collected. I didn't want tears. I didn't want trembling. I didn't want to walk away wishing I'd said more or less or differently. I wanted to be exactly who I had always been. Measured, strategic, clear, but this time not for them. For me. So I packed the envelope in my tote bag and waited. The brunch was held at a mid-tier golf club near my parents' house. Polished wood floors, white linen tablecloths, syrup that came in tiny glass bottles instead of plastic packets. The kind of place where uncomfortable conversations wore perfume and pearls. My mother had organized it, just family, she said. When I arrived, my father was already seated. He wore his usual post-event uniform, navy polo khakis, and that look of casual detachment he used whenever he didn't want to be asked anything serious. My mother smiled and patted the seat beside her. "There's coffee and fruit." I thanked her politely and sat across from them instead. No one mentioned the wedding, or the honeymoon, or the $10,000. It was all weather and real estate and how Andrew and Melissa had really matured. I let them talk. I buttered my toast slowly. And then, just after the waitress cleared the plates, I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. I placed it in the center of the table gently, like I was offering a menu. My father looked at it, then at me. "What's this?" he asked. My voice was calm, practiced. "It's a formal request for reimbursement," I said. "Documented, itemized, reviewed by legal counsel." He blinked. "Reimbursement for what?" "For the wedding," I replied. "And for the $10,000 you transferred from my account during my speech." My mother froze, fingers tightening around her coffee cup. My father's face flushed just slightly. "Julia," I held up one hand. "No drama," I said. "No yelling, no accusations, just numbers, just truth." He opened the envelope, read the first few lines, didn't flip to the appendix. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. My tone didn't change. "No, it's overdue." My mother spoke then. "Honey, we thought I know what you thought," I said gently. "You thought I'd do what I've always done. Smile, absorb, move on." I leaned forward, not to intimidate, but to be clear. "I love you both. That hasn't changed. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's exhaustion, silence. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just drawing a line. For the first time in 36 years, I'm saying this was not okay. And I want it made right." My father exhaled hard. "It was for Andrew." "No," I said. "It was from me." without my consent. I'm your father, he snapped, voice rising slightly. Everything I've done, I stayed still. Was it for me, or was it because you thought I'd never say no? He didn't answer. I'm not taking this to court, I added, unless you force me to. My mother's voice was small. Julia, we never meant, I know, I said. And I did. I knew they never meant to hurt me. They just never meant to see me either. I stood. I'll expect the full amount within 7 days. Wire details are in the letter. No explanations required. No apologies necessary. My mother started to cry. I didn't flinch. Because this wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. Before I left, I turned to them both. I'll always be your daughter. That doesn't change. But from now on, I won't be your accountant, or your safety net, or your ghost benefactor. My father stared at the table. My mother wiped her tears with a cloth napkin. I walked out into the parking lot alone. The sky was overcast, air still. My shoes clicked softly against the concrete, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt something strange settle in my chest. It wasn't peace, it was self-respect. The silence didn't last long. By the time I pulled into my parking garage in Chicago that evening, the first message had already arrived. It was from my mother. Julia, I think you've misunderstood what happened. Please call me. I didn't respond. An hour later, another one. You embarrassed your father. He's very upset. You should have spoken to us privately. Then came the voice messages, short-clipped, passive-aggressive, in that specific way only family can master. The tone of people more offended by your boundaries than by their own behavior. From James, wow. I heard about what you did. Not everything in life is a transaction, you know. From Andrew, I wish you hadn't ruined brunch. Melissa's parents were really uncomfortable. I wanted to scream. Not because they misunderstood, but because they understood exactly and still chose the lie. They weren't confused. They were complicit. I didn't reply, not to a single message, not one call. Instead, I opened my settings and muted the family group chat. Then I blocked my father's number, then my mother's, then both brothers. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a tantrum. It was surgery. Clean, precise, necessary. Because if I didn't amputate the rot, it would fester. I kept expecting to feel guilt, regret, something, but what I felt was relief, not joy, not peace, just the absence of weight I'd carried for too long. People always talk about going no contact like it's a rage-fueled act. But for me, it wasn't that. It was math. Boundaries minus response equals clarity. I made tea that night, sat on the floor of my living room, and stared at the ceiling. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. Instead, I whispered the words I had never dared say before I'm allowed to leave. Not the house, not the family, but the role of fixer, provider, emotional mule. I didn't owe them access to me just because we shared DNA. For years, I had been the bridge that held everything together, but no one ever asked the bridge how much weight it can carry. They just walk across it again and again, assuming it won't collapse. That night, I folded my last wedding receipt into a box, labeled Resolved. Then I slid it into the back of my closet. A tombstone in a way. Not for the relationship, but for the version of me that tolerated everything just to belong. They might think I walked away from them, but the truth, I walked toward myself. I was 18 when I realized the playing field in our family was never level. It started during freshman orientation. I had gotten into Northwestern with a partial scholarship. The rest I covered with federal aid and 2 part-time jobs, one as a library assistant, the other folding clothes at a department store downtown. My parents said they were proud, but when I asked if they could help with books or a train pass, they hesitated. Then said, "You're so resourceful, you'll figure it out." So I did. I budgeted every dollar, bought used textbooks, ate peanut butter sandwiches, and watered down coffee for weeks at a time. I got sick once, really sick, and still dragged myself to work because I couldn't afford to miss a shift. Meanwhile, James, my youngest brother, was a high school junior. My parents bought him a brand new laptop to help with school. A laptop twice as nice as the used one I saved 6 months to buy. That stung, but I swallowed it. I told myself they were just trying to keep him motivated, that it didn't mean they loved him more, that I was the independent one. I started to wear that word like a badge, like armor, independent, strong, untouchable. But strength built on silence isn't strength. It's self-erasure. One weekend I came home. It was midterm season, and I needed to print some pages because the printer at the dorm had broken down. I was tired, hungry, running on 5 hours of sleep and stress. As I walked through the front door, I heard my mother in the kitchen. She was laughing, talking to my father. The radio played softly. Then I heard her say, "She's just so intense now." Honestly, sometimes I miss when Julia was sweet. And my father. She's turning into one of those cold city women. I hope she doesn't end up alone. I didn't walk in. I stood there behind the half-closed door, shoes still on backpack, heavy against my spine. My heart beat so loudly I thought they might hear it. But they didn't. They just kept talking about how serious I was, how I corrected everyone, how I didn't smile enough anymore, as if hardship had made me bitter. Not the hardship they ignored, but the woman it shaped. I backed out of the hallway quietly, walked back to the bus stop in the dark. I cried in the back row, biting my sleeve to stay quiet. They never knew I'd come home that night, and I never told them. After that, I stopped asking for help entirely. If I couldn't carry it alone, I didn't carry it at all. And when James got into college 2 years later, I watched from afar as they helped him move in, bought him dorm supplies, paid for meal plans. He posted pictures. My mom commented, "We're so proud of you, baby. You're our bright star." She'd never written anything like that on my photos, never posted anything about my scholarships or Dean's List awards. When I graduated, she texted me, "Nice job." That was it. But I told myself it was okay, that I didn't need it. That recognition was a childish craving, but in truth I wanted to be seen, not for my achievements, but for how hard I tried, for how often I chose family over comfort, for how many times I swallowed disappointment with a smile just to keep the peace. When I look back on those years now, I don't feel angry. I feel sad. Not for who I was, but for how long I stayed that way, trying to earn something that should have been given freely. Love, respect, acknowledgement. Sometimes injustice doesn't come as a slap. It comes as a shrug. And sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't when someone breaks your trust. It's when they never bothered to build it in the first place. The wire transfer came through on a Thursday morning. No subject line, no attached message. Just a single entry in my transaction log, D. Whitmore, $31 or $74.75. ACH deposit. I stared at the screen for a full minute, not because I was shocked, but because it felt so clinical. No apology, no call, no, "We understand now." Just the number, clean, sterile, final. It was everything I had asked for, down to the cent. And yet for a second my fingers hovered over my phone. Some dusty corner of me still wanted to believe they'd follow up. Maybe a text, a line. Something like, "We didn't realize how much you carried. We're sorry." But no. Silence. It echoed louder than any scream. I closed the banking app and made myself a cup of tea. No sugar, just mint leaves and boiled water. As it steeped, I opened the family group chat out of habit. The last message was from my mother, sent days earlier. "Julia, just remember who we are. Family is family." I reread it slowly. Then without hesitation, I tapped leave group. No dramatic exit, no announcement, just gone. And as soon as I left, I felt that strange, quiet relief that no one ever talks about. The kind that doesn't cheer or dance. It just exhales, like taking off shoes that never really fit. I didn't block them completely, not this time. Not because I was afraid of guilt, but because indifference doesn't need barricades. What I needed wasn't distance, it was clarity. They paid because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. They paid because the letter was real, because I had changed. I'd taken myself off autopilot, and now they were responding to a version of me they didn't know how to manipulate. I transferred the money into a new account, labeled it for me. Only me. Then I changed all passwords, again. I logged out of every old email address, every digital backdoor, every breadcrumb that linked them to any part of my finances, my systems, my structure. No more loopholes, no more assumed access. I was no longer the family's open wallet. I was a closed door. Later that afternoon, I deleted every financial spreadsheet with their names in it. Not out of spite, but because I was no longer in charge of their chaos. I wasn't their fixer. I wasn't their investment. I wasn't their insurance policy against consequences. I was their daughter. And if that wasn't enough for them to love me before, then let the silence speak now. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. I had my voice, my boundaries, and now, finally, my money. I booked the trip on a whim. No itinerary, no companion. Just a one-way ticket to the coast, a small seaside town in Oregon, and a single suitcase packed with linen shirts and notebooks I hadn't touched in years. I told no one. I turned off email notifications, set my voicemail to silent, let the world shrink to the rhythm of waves and the sound of my own breath. The rental house sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It had peeling white paint, creaky wooden floors, and a balcony that faced west. Every evening the sky burned gold before falling quiet. It was perfect. I arrived just before sunset. As I stood on the porch, salt air curling around my ankles, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Stillness. No one needed anything from me. No one expected updates, favors, money explanations. There was no checklist, no agenda, no silent debt hanging in the air. Just me. And that unfamiliar, almost awkward question. What do you want, Julia? I didn't know how to answer, so I started small. I woke up when my body told me to. I walked barefoot through the dewy grass each morning. I wrote in a notebook without structure or grammar, just spilled thoughts like water from a cracked cup. One afternoon I brought my journal to the beach. I found a flat rock, sat with my legs crossed, and listened. Not to the ocean, but to myself. To the versions of me I'd buried to keep the peace. The girl who cried quietly on the bus that night freshman year. The young woman who handed over her first paycheck with hope in her chest. The daughter who never heard thank you. I didn't hate them. I honored them. And then I let them go. I wrote a sentence I hadn't dared before. I was never the difficult one. I was the one left to carry what others refused to face. The wind caught the edge of the page. I held it down. I smiled. Not wide, not triumphant, just real. That night I cooked for myself. Something simple, lemon pasta with grilled shrimp. I poured a glass of white wine, lit a candle, and played soft music. I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole. I didn't miss them. I missed the idea of them, the version of family I had created in my mind to survive the one I had. There's grief in that realization, but also freedom. Freedom to rebuild not from scratch, but from truth. Before bed, I wrote in my journal again, just one line. This is what it feels like to belong to yourself. And I meant it, every word. I thought if I gave enough, I said softly, they'd finally love me the way I needed. Dr. Marks didn't interrupt. She never did. Her office was warm that day. Golden light filtered through the blinds, dust, floating in lazy spirals. A plant in the corner had started to bloom. The air smelled faintly of cedar and peppermint oil. I sat on the couch, hands folded, posture straighter than usual, different, like something inside me had stopped flinching. I kept thinking love was a transaction. I continued. If I fixed their problems, paid their bills, made myself useful, then one day maybe they'd say it, out loud, that I mattered. And did they? She asked gently. I shook my head. No, not once, not really. She tilted her head. Then why keep giving? I smiled. It wasn't bitter, it was tired. Because giving was how I stayed relevant. If I stopped, I'd disappear. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick, sacred, the kind that holds space for truth. I looked out the window. There's a kind of grief, I said, that comes when you realize your family loves the version of you that makes their lives easier, not the version that needs care herself. Dr. Marks nodded slowly. I went to the ocean last week, I told her. Sat alone, wrote things I've never said out loud, such as I hesitated. Then I spoke. I'm allowed to want softness. I blinked and a tear fell, just one. It hit my wrist, disappeared into my sleeve. For so long I thought strength meant silence. That dignity meant swallowing pain. But now I think maybe real strength is being able to say, this hurt me, and not apologizing for it. Dr. Marks leaned in slightly. What do you believe about love now? I took a breath. I think love that requires you to shrink isn't love. It's survival dressed as loyalty. Another pause. And what do you believe about yourself? That question hung in the air like fog. I swallowed. I'm not cold, I said. I'm not ungrateful. I'm not too much. I'm just finally full. And I don't want to empty myself again just to be allowed at someone else's table. I looked at her. My voice was steady now. They can keep their table. I'll build my own. Her eyes softened. She wrote something down, then said, I think you're coming home to yourself. And in that moment, I believed her. Not because she said it, but because for the first time I felt it. Somewhere deep inside me, under years of duty and compliance and careful composure, something brave had stirred. It didn't roar, it didn't rage. It just whispered, you don't have to earn what should have been given freely. After that last session with Dr. Marks, I didn't go straight home. I wandered into a bookstore I'd passed a dozen times but never entered. The kind with handwritten staff recommendations and creaky wood floors that smelled like ink and history. I wasn't looking for anything, but something found me. A small paperback with a pale blue cover. The title was simple, Your Life Doesn't Belong to Them. I bought it without reading the back. That night I stayed up reading until 3 a.m. Not because it offered new information, but because it gave language to things I had only ever felt in silence. And when I closed the final page, I whispered out loud, it's not too late to start again. The next morning, I did something bold. I emailed my realtor and said I was ready to sell the condo. The place had been a milestone, once my first proof of success. But now it felt like a vault, a symbol of control, not comfort. I didn't want to live in proof anymore. I wanted to live in possibility. Within 2 weeks, I downsized to a smaller place, sunlight streaming through big windows, creaky old pipes, a coffee shop downstairs that remembered my name by day 3. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. And more importantly, it was chosen, not inherited from expectation. That same month, I filed paperwork for a new nonprofit. Foundation name, the Ledger Project Mission. To offer free financial literacy workshops for women who've been emotionally or financially exploited by family. It started with 4 volunteers, a rented room at a community center, 2 folding tables, a whiteboard with a crack in the corner. Our first session had 6 women. Each had a story. Some were caregivers, some were divorced. Some had paid their brother's rent or co-signed a car for a cousin who ghosted them. Some had nothing left but quiet rage and debt collectors. And one by one they cried when I told them, you are not selfish for wanting to keep what you earn. Boundaries don't make you cruel. They make you credible. You are not alone in this. After the 3rd session, one of them, her name was Marisol, came up to me and said I thought I was just broken. Turns out I was just exhausted. I smiled. Me too. Each week I watched women come back with a little more fire in their posture, a little more space in their breath, a little less apology in their voice. They weren't just learning about credit scores and savings accounts. They were learning how to stand, how to stay standing. And so was I. One evening after a session ended, I walked home in the rain without an umbrella. For once, I didn't rush. I let the water soak through my sweater and drip down my arms. I let the cold remind me I was alive, that I wasn't made of glass, that I could hold discomfort without unraveling. I reached my building and stopped at the entrance. Staring at my reflection in the glass door, I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who refused to disappear, a woman who had once mistaken love for labor and now knew better, a woman who built something out of what others discarded. Later that night, I opened my laptop and started drafting the outline for a book. Working title, You Were Always Enough Lessons on Worth Boundaries and Becoming Your Own Legacy. The words poured out, not because I had healed everything, but because I had stopped pretending I needed to. And that was enough. That was freedom. I might never be the daughter who gets a birthday post. I might never be invited back to the family group chat. But I'm the woman who paid her own way, told her own story, and gave other women permission to do the same. And that to me is worth far more than approval. It's worth becoming. The call came just after 9 p.m. I was folding laundry, half watching a documentary about coral reefs, when the screen lit up. Mom. I hadn't heard her voice in months. Part of me wanted to let it ring, to let the silence finish what I had started. But something in me, curiosity, duty, maybe even some ghost of love, answered anyway. Hi, Mom, her voice cracked. Julia? Pause. I didn't know if you'd pick up. I said nothing. She inhaled. I could hear her trying to keep herself composed. Your father's in the hospital. I blinked. What happened? Chest pains. They think it might have been a small heart attack. He's stable, but they're running tests. I nodded slowly, though she couldn't see it. Do you want me to say something? I asked. No, she whispered. I just thought you should know. More silence. Then she added, he asked about you. I didn't ask what he said. I didn't need to. She filled the gap anyway. He said he hopes you're doing okay. That maybe you'll visit. My heart didn't clench. My breath didn't catch. Instead, I asked one simple question. Has he ever apologized? The line went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that waits for a response. The kind that is the response. I heard her exhale, heard the faint beeping of hospital machines in the background, the clink of metal against tile. Then no, but he's your father. I almost laughed. As if biology erased betrayal. As if DNA canceled out dignity. He stole from me, Mom, I said calmly. You know that. She didn't argue. I'm not asking you to forget, she said. I'm just asking you to remember. He's not well. I let the words settle. I imagined the hospital room. The sterile sheets. His weathered hands. The man who taught me how to balance a checkbook. And then emptied mine without permission. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't seeking revenge. But I also wasn't returning to the role they once gave me. I hope he gets better, I said honestly. Will you come see him? I paused. Then gently, no. She didn't beg, didn't protest, just said, okay. And that single word, small broken, was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. Before we hung up, I asked, do you ever wonder why I stopped playing along? She didn't answer right away. Then all the time, I nodded again, quietly. Maybe one day I'll tell you. And then I ended the call. No anger, no tears. Just me standing in my living room, the soft hum of the dryers spinning behind me, and the quiet understanding that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it's just release. I was 9 the year they forgot my name on the cake. It wasn't the first time something small had gone unnoticed, but it was the first time it felt like erasure. The party was simple, just family. A homemade chocolate sheet cake, plastic streamers from the dollar store, my grandmother's mismatched dishes laid out across the dining room table. I didn't care about fancy. I just wanted to feel like I mattered. The cake was supposed to say, Happy Birthday, Julia James, and Andrew, a joint celebration as our birthdays all fell within 3 weeks. But when my mom opened the box, it only read, Happy Birthday, James and Andrew. She blinked, stared at the icing, then laughed like it didn't matter. Oh, must have been a mix-up. Probably forgot to write all 3 names. My brothers didn't notice. They were already tearing open presents, arguing over who got the bigger remote-controlled car. I stood behind the kitchen counter holding a paper plate, staring at the sugary script. My name wasn't there, not even in mistake, not even misspelled, just absent. I'll fix it, my mother said, rummaging through the junk drawer. She came back with a tube of red gel frosting, the kind that oozed out unevenly and tasted like chemicals. She squeezed 3 crooked letters onto the corner J-U-L. There wasn't enough space to finish it. There, she said, wiping her hands. Good as new, but it wasn't. The other names were written in perfect cursive, centered and clean. Mine looked like an afterthought, like an accident someone half-heartedly tried to undo. I smiled anyway, because I was 9, because I'd already learned it was better to pretend things didn't sting than to be told I was too sensitive. Later that night, I sat on the porch swing with a plate of cake in my lap. The piece had no lettering on it, just a blank corner with uneven frosting and a crack in the sponge. My dad stepped outside, leaned against the rail. Good cake, huh? I nodded. He ruffled my hair. That's my girl. Then he went back inside. I watched the porch light flicker above me, listened to the muffled laughter coming from the living room. I chewed slowly, trying not to cry. But the truth is, I wasn't sad because of the cake. I was sad because no one noticed I didn't blow out a candle. They sang the song, took pictures, clapped when James and Andrew made a wish, but no one lit mine. There wasn't room on the cake for my name, and there wasn't time in the moment for my flame. I never said anything, not then, not the next day, not even years later when we looked through photo albums and my mom said, Look how happy you were. Because I looked happy. Because I had learned how to look happy. That's what hurt the most. Not the forgetting, but the fact that I made it easy to forget me. And they did. Again and again. Until one day I stopped waiting for candles. I just lit the fire myself. Dear Dad. I don't know if you would have read this even if I sent it. Maybe you would have skimmed it. Maybe you would have rolled your eyes and muttered something about how I always make things dramatic. But I'm not writing this for you to understand me. I'm writing this so I no longer have to carry everything you never said. You see, I spent most of my life trying to earn a kind of love you never offered. Not because I wasn't worthy of it, but because you didn't know how to give it unless it came with a cost. For years I gave time, money, help, silence. I told myself it was my duty, that if I kept showing up, you'd eventually see me. But all it did was teach you that I was convenient, dependable, expendable. You didn't say thank you when I paid the mortgage. You didn't say good job when I got promoted. You didn't say sorry when you stole from me. And still some part of me kept hoping you would. I realize now. That part of me was the little girl on the porch swing holding a piece of birthday cake with no candle. That girl deserved better. So this letter isn't a demand. It's a release. I release myself from waiting for an apology. I release you from the role of the father I needed you to be. And I release the past from its grip on who I am becoming. You were not all bad. I remember your jokes on road trips, how you taught me to calculate tips in my head, how you called me kiddo when I did something clever. But good moments don't cancel harm. They just complicate it. So I've chosen to hold both. To remember that you love me the way you knew how, even if that love came wrapped in conditions I no longer accept. I forgive you, Dad. Not because you asked for it, but because I want to live a life that's not ruled by what you couldn't give. Forgiveness for me isn't letting you off the hook. It's taking the hook out of me. I'm writing this because I need space in my chest for joy. Because I'm learning how to love without being invisible. Because I'm building something beautiful, and I won't let your silence fill the foundation. You'll never get this letter. You'll never read these words. But I will. And that's enough. Julia? I folded the letter slowly. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. Then I lit a match. The flame caught at the corner. Paper curled. Ink turned to smoke. I held it over the kitchen sink until it became ash. Then I rinsed the sink clean. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just stood there in the fading light, one hand braced on the counter, the other open and empty. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt whole. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind that smelled like fresh notebooks and second chances. I stood in front of a small group of women, 8 to be exact, gathered in the back room of the local library for my third free financial literacy workshop. It was called Money and Boundaries, but really it was about reclaiming power. These women weren't strangers to sacrifice. They were teachers, caretakers, cashiers, single mom survivors. And as I stood by the whiteboard with my markers and budget charts, I could feel the quiet ache in the room, the kind that comes from years of giving without being allowed to ask. We were halfway through the session when I saw her, Marissa. She had barely spoken all evening, sat in the corner, hoodie pulled tight, eyes lowered. But when I said no is a complete sentence, her head lifted. When I said you don't owe anyone your retirement savings just because they call you mom or honey, she exhaled hard. And when I said financial abuse isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like we need your card for just this month, she cried. Not sobbing, just 2 tears quietly escaping, one down each cheek. I paused, let the silence hold her gently. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a worn paperback I had carried for years. It was called Boundaries, not a fancy edition. Just highlighted, dog-eared, and loved into softness. I walked over and placed it on the table in front of her. I was 36 when I finally finished reading this, I said. It helped me realize that loving someone doesn't mean bankrupting yourself emotionally or financially. She stared at the book like it was both a mirror and a map. After class, she waited until the others left. Then she came up to me. I didn't know there was a name for it, she whispered. What they did? I nodded. There is. And now you can name it. And name your way out of it. She held the book to her chest like a fragile secret. I don't have money for therapy yet, she said, but this feels like a start. I smiled. Books saved me before people did, I told her. She left that night a little taller, and I stood there in the empty room watching the shadows lengthen on the floor. feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, purpose. Not revenge, not righteousness, just the quiet fulfillment of being useful, in a way that didn't drain me. That night I walked home under the Chicago streetlights, humming a tune I didn't recognize. And when I got to my apartment, I wrote a single sentence in my journal. When one woman learns to say no, 10 more, remember they can. The beach hadn't changed. Not the curve of the shoreline, not the way the gulls cried overhead, not the scent of salt and pine woven into the breeze. But I had. I parked at the same gravel lot where I'd stood months ago, raw, hollowed out, trembling behind my sunglasses. Back then I had come here to disappear, to fall apart quietly somewhere the world wouldn't hear me cracking. This time I came to mark something else, not an ending, not quite a beginning, just a shift. I kicked off my shoes and stepped into the sand. It was cool beneath my feet, familiar, honest. Sand never pretends to be anything but itself. The wind met me halfway. It didn't ask questions. It didn't bring up the past. It didn't require me to perform forgiveness or package my pain neatly for family consumption. It just wrapped around me messy, wild, and unapologetic. I walked to the same rock I'd sat on before, notebook in hand, the one I had cried into for hours that first trip. The pages were tear-stained and bent, some entries barely legible. I flipped to a blank page, not to write, just to hold it, to acknowledge the space that used to ache and didn't anymore. I let my arms fall to my sides, palms open like I was offering nothing and everything back to the wind. Above me, clouds shifted into slow silver patterns, and in that moment I whispered 3 words that were more for me than for anyone else. I release you. I didn't say who I was talking to. It could have been my father, my mother, my own younger self who spent decades twisting into knots to earn affection that never came. It didn't matter. I released them all. I didn't need an apology to heal. I didn't need a rewrite of the past to write the rest of my future. I just needed to stop handing over the pen. I sat there for a long while, not thinking, not fixing, just breathing. Letting the wind remind me I was still here, still mine. Eventually I stood, walked back across the sand. Before leaving, I turned around once more, not to long for anything, but to say thank you to the woman who had once sat there shattered and scared, and still found the strength to rise. She was me. But I am not her anymore. Now I carry boundaries like sunscreen daily, gently, without apology. Now I don't shrink to fit someone's comfort zone. Now I know that peace isn't quiet. Peace is choosing silence when chaos demands noise. It's choosing to walk away without slamming the door. It's choosing not to answer when the past calls back, especially when it has nothing new to say. I got in the car and rolled down the windows. No destination, just motion, just air, just me. For the first time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. And the wind didn't ask who I used to be. It just called me forward. I opened my laptop, not to check emails, not to scroll through social media, but to begin. The cursor blinked on a blank document. Top left corner, new project, Julia Whitmore. I typed the title slowly, carefully, like every keystroke was a vow. Financial abuse in families when love costs too much. Then I sat back, closed my eyes, and let it land. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't closure. It was a blueprint, a warning, a gift. For every woman who's ever emptied her account for a wedding she wasn't welcome at. For every daughter who became a breadwinner at 19 and a scapegoat at 25. For every sister who covered for her brother's debts, while being told she was too emotional when she asked to be repaid. I was writing for them, but also for me. Because something powerful happens when you put your story on paper, not to bleed, but to teach. Not to demand sympathy, but to create clarity. Not to vent, but to build a bridge out of the rubble. The book would be part memoir, part manual. Real stories, real numbers, real names where permitted. It would cover everything I had to learn the hard way. How to spot patterns of financial manipulation cloaked as tradition. How to set boundaries in families where guilt is currency. How to untangle love from obligation and rebuild your sense of worth without their approval. I thought about the women from my class. Their eyes, their questions, their whispered me to S. One had said I didn't even know there was a word for what happened to me. I wanted to give them that word, then give them the next sentence, and the next, and the next. The wind was still drifting in from the balcony. My notebook from the beach lay beside me, spine cracked open, pages half-filled and sand-speckled. I looked at the open file again. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. And then, because it felt right, I added a line beneath the title, a dedication, for the daughters who stayed silent too long. You don't owe them your voice, but you do owe yourself your truth. I hit save. The document flickered, then settled, a seed planted. Someday it would grow into a resource, a lifeline, maybe even a movement. But tonight it was enough that it existed, that I existed in my own space, on my own terms. I got up and made tea, chamomile with honey, simple, warm, as it steeped. My phone buzzed. Not a family call, a new message. A woman from the workshop. Her name was Kiara. She wrote, I told my mom I won't be giving her rent money anymore. She hung up on me, but I didn't cry. I read the pages you gave us. I felt strong. Thank you. I didn't reply right away. I just stared at the message, smiled, then whispered to myself, you did good, Julia. You really did. Not because I'd fixed my family, not because I'd finally received an apology that never came, but because I'd stopped waiting for either and started building something better instead. That's what healing looked like, not fireworks, not applause, just consistency, courage, clarity. And on the nights when it got hard again because I had words, my own words, my story, and one day maybe someone else's turning point. I walked to the balcony, cup in hand. The city lights glimmered like someone had scattered hope across the skyline. And inside me something quiet but certain said, you're not their daughter anymore, not in the way they taught you to be. You're yours now. I took a deep breath and opened a second file. Chapter 1. The Price of Silence. After my brother's wedding, I found $10,000 missing from my account. Like many family betrayal stories, mine began with a dangerous belief that love can be earned through giving. For years I gave time, energy, money, always hoping to be seen to belong. As the eldest daughter in a family that valued sons more, I became the silent supporter, the responsible one, the invisible one. I paid for everything at my brother's wedding, the flowers, the venue, even their honeymoon. But what broke me wasn't the money, it was discovering that my father had stolen $10,000 from my personal account without a word. When I confronted him, he froze. My mother looked away. No apologies, no shame, just silence. Unlike typical revenge stories fueled by rage, mine unfolded with calm precision. I gathered documents, wrote a legal letter, and laid it on the brunch table the morning after the wedding. I didn't raise my voice, I raised my boundaries. Revenge stories often dramatize retribution, but the most powerful ones reclaim dignity. Mine ended not with shouting, but with growth. I started therapy, cut toxic ties, and launched a financial literacy program for women who've been exploited by family. My story proves what the best revenge stories remind us. Healing is louder than hate. Justice can be quiet. And reclaiming your voice, even in a whisper, can echo for generations. Thank you for watching and supporting our channel. If you've ever been underestimated by those closest to you, this story is for you.